We exhibit a pathological arrogance about our place in the universe. We map the dead craters of Mars. We plot mathematical trajectories to distant star systems. We claim absolute terrestrial supremacy over this rock. But here is the brutal physical reality. 95% of the dominant biosphere on this very planet is a crushing void. It is a pitch-black, hostile megastructure. Our specific biology strictly prohibits us from ever entering it. We do not rule this planet. We merely survive on its dry, shallow roof. We are tolerated guests on a thin, oxidized crust. Watch closely how a human reacts to this boundary. An adult male wades into the ocean at a populated public beach. The salt water reaches his waist. He takes one single step forward. His leading foot fails to locate the expected sandbar. His body suddenly drops into an unseen geographical depression. Instantly, his center of gravity falls. His autonomic nervous system entirely hijacks his motor control. His arms violently flail outward. He actively attempts to maximize his physical surface area against the water. His baseline respiration aggressively shifts. Slow, rhythmic nasal inhales vanish. They are instantly replaced by sharp, audible oral gasps. His pupils dilate to their absolute physical limit. His eyes lock onto the opaque liquid surrounding his torso. He violently backpedals toward the shore. He pulls his knees unnaturally high out of the water. He instinctively minimizes all submerged limb exposure to the void. He drags his physical mass back to the safety of the shallows. This entire biomechanical sequence executes automatically. It occurs completely before his conscious mind processes the lack of an actual physical threat. The actual fatal mechanism lies in this immediate autonomic terror. At 500 meters deep, the physical properties of the ocean entirely eradicate solar light. We call this the twilight zone. Human vision is our primary evolutionary survival tool. Down here, it is rendered utterly and permanently useless. The actual fatal mechanism begins inside your skull. The human brain dedicates roughly 30% of its cortex strictly to visual processing. It relies on a constant, uninterrupted stream of photons to map spatial boundaries. When you submerge into the abyss, this photon input abruptly ceases. The visual cortex completely fails to establish a physical perimeter. This creates an immediate, catastrophic sensory vacuum. Your brain interprets this absence of light as an active, imminent threat. The locus coeruleus initiates an emergency physiological protocol. It forcefully secretes a massive dose of noradrenaline into your nervous system. This chemical flooding violently hypersensitizes your remaining senses. Your auditory and somatosensory cortices are dialed up to agonizing levels. You feel every microscopic temperature shift against your skin. You hear the internal friction of your own circulating blood. Evolutionary psychology mathematically guarantees your paranoia in this darkness. In an unlit environment, a biological false positive ensures survival. Imagining a predator that does not exist keeps the organism alive. A false negative results in immediate death. Therefore, your brain aggressively attempts to fill in the missing visual data. It actively weaponizes your own imagination against you. It systematically projects immense, hostile geometries into the empty void. Every temperature drop is computationally rendered as an apex threat. The opaque water itself mutates into a psychological pathogen. Your mind infects itself with the absolute certainty of an approaching leviathan. Watch closely how they react in the field. A recreational scuba diver descends along a sunlit coral wall at a mere 30 meters. They pivot their torso away from the reef to face the open, deep blue ocean. The physical respiration rate on their regulator abruptly doubles. A rapid, chaotic stream of exhaust bubbles violently erupts from their mouthpiece. Their left hand compulsively grasps their digital depth gauge. They physically check the illuminated numbers every 5 seconds. Their pupils dilate maximally, straining to capture non-existent light from the abyss below. The trapezius and sternocleidomastoid muscles in their neck visibly spasm and lock. These thick muscle groups pull their shoulders violently toward their ears. This is an involuntary, pre-impact defensive posture. Their physical body is bracing for a high-velocity collision with a threat they cannot even see. The immediate consequence is the total degradation of rational thought. The human brain violently abandons the prefrontal cortex. The logical assessment of safety is completely discarded, but the eradication of our primary sense is merely the first layer of oceanic hostility. As we descend past 1,000 meters into the midnight zone, the ocean shifts. It is no longer just a liquid medium. It transforms into a relentless, crushing physical force. This environment is fundamentally incompatible with human anatomy. The actual fatal mechanism is governed by Boyle's law. Human biology is critically reliant on air-filled cavities. Your lungs, your sinuses, and your middle ear are all structural liabilities. For every 10 meters of descent, the hydrostatic pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. The volume of gas inside your body decreases proportionally. At extreme depths, this pressure violently compresses every internal cavity you possess. The physical threat is omnidirectional. Human proprioception evolved strictly to handle gravity. Gravity is a unidirectional force pulling you downward. Hydrostatic pressure, however, pushes inward from every conceivable angle. It is a 360-degree, three-dimensional assault on your structural integrity. The central nervous system cannot process a defensive posture against this. It cannot lean away from the weight of the ocean. This triggers acute, clinical claustrophobia at a molecular level. The brain realizes it is facing an inescapable structural failure. Watch closely the behavior of a passenger in a deep sea submersible. They are protected by a highly advanced, heavily reinforced titanium hull. But as the digital depth gauge rolls past 1,500 meters, the mask slips. The passenger exhibits unconscious, grounding behaviors. They grip the armrests of their seat with localized violence. The skin over their knuckles turns a stark, bloodless white. The blood flow to their nail beds ceases entirely. They swallow repeatedly and aggressively. They are attempting to clear their eustachian tubes against a phantom pressure. The cabin is fully pressurized, yet their biology refuses to believe it. Their respiration shifts to rapid, shallow chest breathing. They subconsciously restrict the movement of their own diaphragm. This is driven by an irrational neurological fear. Their brain is convinced that expanding their lungs will cause their ribcage to shatter. This is the psychological realization of absolute biological fragility. The human form is not just ill-equipped for this depth. It is a structural liability. We are inherently designed to fail in this environment. Crushing pressure and absolute darkness create a lethal void for us. Yet, these exact parameters have incubated a parallel tree of life. In the Abyssal Zone, between 4,000 and 11,000 meters, the rules of biology are rewritten. This is where complex apex life forms thrive. Vampire squids, anglerfish, and xenophyophores dominate this space. They exist in conditions that would instantly liquefy every human organ. The actual fatal mechanism here is the macrobiological uncanny valley. Humans categorize life based on terrestrial symmetry. We look for bilateral features, mammalian traits, and avian anatomical constraints. Deep, say biomechanics, violently violate every cognitive template we possess. Bioluminescent predatory lures mimic nothing found on land. Transparent craniums expose pulsing, alien nervous systems. Expandable mandibles allow for the consumption of prey twice their own mass. Deep-sea gigantism turns simple organisms into nightmare scale. Anomalies, these are high-efficiency adaptations for extreme cold and crushing pressure. When confronted with these entities, your brain does not process them as animals. The visual anomaly bypasses your logic centers entirely. It activates the insular cortex. This is the specific brain region responsible for processing disgust and contamination. Your subconscious mind categorizes these creatures as pathogenic aberrations. They are seen as biological errors that threaten the natural order of your reality. Watch closely how an observer reacts to a digital image. An individual lies in bed at night. An image of a female anglerfish appears on the glowing screen. It shows heavily fused, atrophied male parasites permanently melted into its underbelly. The individual physically recoils from the device. They instantly pull the phone 5 inches away from their face. The levator labii superioris muscle in their face activates. This causes a subtle involuntary curling of the upper lip. This is the universal human expression of physical revulsion. They immediately swipe away from the image to break the visual connection, but they experience a transient spike in galvanic skin response. Their palms become instantly uncomfortably damp. They feel a lingering, phantom tactile sensation of formication. It is the distinct feeling of insects crawling beneath their skin. This is the total destruction of the anthropocentric worldview. Life does not require our sunlight. Life does not require our oxygen to dominate this planet. In the true scale of the Earth, we are the weak, isolated anomaly. Thalassophobia is completely misunderstood. It is not an irrational anxiety disorder. It is a hyperlucid, mathematically accurate recognition of our ecological irrelevance. We do not inhabit a terrestrial world. We live on a thin, dry crust floating precariously above an ancient, dark, and crushing alien megastructure. This unseen reality beneath us tolerates our existence solely because we lack the biological capability to cross its borders. We are the outsiders looking into the true Earth, but you can survive the realization. Cease confronting the ocean with terrestrial arrogance. When you enter open water, you must actively override your autonomic nervous system. Force your physical exhales to be exactly twice as long as your inhales. This specific respiratory mechanical action stimulates the vagus nerve. It artificially suppresses the locus coeruleus from dumping panic, inducing noradrenaline into your bloodstream. Acknowledge your biomechanical inferiority. The second the water passes your knees, do not attempt to establish physical dominance in an environment governed strictly by pressure and darkness. Survive by submission. If you have the psychological endurance to strip away the comforting illusions of human supremacy and look at the clinical, terrifying reality of the world we actually live in, we will continue to map the abyss of our own existence. See you in the next descent.